I am Isabella Chen, but everyone calls me Izzy. That year, I had just turned 22, the age of unbroken dreams and the naive belief that fairness would naturally emerge if you tried hard enough. Having graduated with honors from Columbia with a double degree in finance and systems engineering, I stepped into the glass skyscraper of Whitmore Group, the illustrious family company where I thought I would be recognized as part of its lifeblood. I was wrong. That day was the annual general meeting, an event so grand it made anyone feel small. The glass walls encircling the top floor reflected New York's blazing summer sunlight, creating a sensation both dazzling and cold. I wore a simple business dress, clutching a meticulously prepared portfolio, my heart filled with a mix of nerves and hope. I believed my degree and effort would be my ticket to joining the ranks of the next generation of leaders. My aunt, Catherine Whitmore, sat at the head of the long walnut table, her demeanor as icy as a statue. She was the most powerful woman in the family, whose mere frown could silence an entire room. Her eyes swept over me as if I were a stranger, an intern, not blood. Next to her was Andrew, my cousin, the one hailed since childhood as the worthy heir. He was impeccably dressed, presenting with flashy PowerPoint charts, his voice brimming with confidence bordering on arrogance. I sat quietly, listening, but inside I kept thinking, if fairness existed, my efforts would surely be recognized on par with his. When I stood to present my aspiration to join Whitmore Group, my heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. I believe that with my academic background and dedication, I can contribute to Whitmore Group, particularly in optimizing finance and supply chains. The room froze for a few seconds. Then Aunt Catherine set her coffee cup down, her lips curling into a faint, cold smile. Izzy, you may be smart, you may have ambition, but Whitmore Group doesn't just need degrees. What matters more is bloodline tradition, and unfortunately you lack that. An invisible knife sliced through my pride. Before I could gather myself, Andrew chimed in, his tone half joking, half condescending, but dripping with arrogance. Little sis, book smarts are one thing, but to lead an empire like this, you need more than pretty numbers on a degree. Honestly, I think you'd be better suited as an assistant. Laughter rippled around the meeting table, a few nodding in agreement. I stood there, as if I'd become a public joke in the midst of my own family. Heat surged to my face, my throat tightened, but I held my head high. I knew that if I let a single tear fall, they'd forever see me as weak, unworthy of being heard. In that moment, I realized a bitter truth. In their eyes, I would never be Whitmore enough to be trusted. I was just the outsider niece, no matter my effort or achievements. When the meeting ended, I walked out of the building. New York's radiant sunlight suddenly felt like a judgmental spotlight, illuminating my heavy steps. Amid the sea of people on Fifth Avenue, I felt small, swallowed whole. But in that humiliation, a different flame ignited, the determination to prove them wrong. That night, in my rundown rented apartment near Chinatown, I opened my notebook and wrote the first line. June 12th. Rejected by Whitmore Group, not for lack of ability, but for lack of bloodline. From now on, I'll forge my own path, and one day they'll face me, not as aunt and cousin, but as those who need me. I closed the notebook, my heart both aching and clear. Perhaps one only truly grows up when forced to step out from the shadow of family. At this point, I want to ask you, the reader of this story, have you ever been turned away by family or those who should have trusted you? How much does that pain sting, doesn't it? If you've been through it, share your story in the comments. I want to listen, because perhaps sharing is how we heal each other. They say when one door closes, another opens. But the truth is, sometimes you have to break down a wall to find a way forward. After that day of being cast aside at Whitmore headquarters, no door opened for me. All there was a terrifying void between disappointment and an uncertain future. But in that void, Orion Global Holdings was born. Orion's beginnings were far from dreamy. A small rented room in Brooklyn, a wobbly second-hand wooden desk, an old laptop I bought off a student on Craigslist. My capital? A few $1,000s saved from part-time jobs during college, plus a small bank loan granted only because my credit score was decent. Honestly, if someone had asked me back then, Izzy, do you think you'll build a global corporation? I'd have laughed. I was only thinking, as long as I can prove I'm not the reject Andrew mocked. Those first nights, I juggled learning to draft contracts while scrambling for clients. Without Whitmore's backing, I had to knock on the doors of small businesses, pitching consulting and supply chain optimization services. They looked at me, a 22-year-old girl in a cheap suit, with skepticism. I had to talk more, prove more, and face more rejections than anyone my age. I still remember my first contract vividly, a small trucking company in New Jersey. The owner, a grumpy, middle-aged man, squinted at me and asked, "What can you do for us besides waste our time?" I swallowed hard, smiled, and said, "I don't promise to change the world, but I guarantee I'll cut your operating costs by at least 15% in 6 months. If I fail, you don't pay a cent." Maybe it was that boldness that convinced him. I dove into the work, pulling all-nighters analyzing transport data, optimizing routes, renegotiating fuel contracts. 6 months later, the savings weren't 15%. They were 22%. That was the first time I felt someone truly believed in my ability, not because they had to, but because I proved it with results. But the path wasn't all successes. There were crushing failures. A logistics company in Chicago terminated our contract after 3 months, accusing me of being inexperienced and lacking real-world expertise. I cried all night, wondering if I was fighting a battle too big for me. But the next morning, I wiped my tears, opened my laptop, and kept sending pitch emails. I knew that giving up would mean living forever in Whitmore's shadow. 3 years later, Orion was no longer a tiny startup. We were in 5 major U.S. cities, signing contracts with mid-sized firms. I hired my first team, a group of young, daring people like me, willing to work 80-hour weeks because they believed in the vision I painted. Our office stayed lit until 2 a.m., the sound of keyboards mingling with exhausted laughter. In those bleary-eyed faces, I saw the determination I'd once wished for from my family. By the 4th year, Orion went international. London, Berlin, Singapore, and gradually 12 other countries. Revenue soared beyond my wildest dreams. Some mornings, standing on the balcony of our new Manhattan office, I'd look down at the bustling Wall Street and laugh bitterly. If Andrew saw this, he'd probably choke on his coffee. The ultimate irony? Whitmore Group, the name that once cast me out, now depended on Orion. Quietly, I'd signed contracts making Orion their top client, accounting for 70% of their logistics revenue. I still remember the day we finalized the deal. Catherine had no idea the person behind the negotiations was the niece she'd coldly dismissed. I sent a legal representative, staying in the shadows. Sometimes, silence is the sharpest blow. Day by day, month by month, year by year, I grew Orion not just with ambition, but with the sting of that old humiliation. Every time I felt like giving up, I remembered Catherine's dismissive look, Andrew's mocking laughter. They became the fuel driving me forward. Now, 6 years later, Orion Global Holdings has surpassed Whitmore Group in both revenue and scale. But I've kept my identity a secret. I want them to sit there, smug in their belief that they're untouchable, while their financial lifeline depends on my company. And perhaps you're wondering, Izzy, why not reveal yourself from the start? Why wait 6 long years? The answer is simple. I wanted them to feel the full sting of fate, just as I once did. There are moments in life you know will be etched in your memory forever. For me, it was that morning, 6 years after being cast out, when I stepped back into Whitmore's headquarters. 6 years of turning humiliation into fuel, transforming a tiny Brooklyn rental into Orion Global Holdings, with offices across 12 countries. Now, I return to Manhattan, not as a beggar for opportunity, but as the one holding the financial lifeline of the entire Whitmore empire. The elevator took me to the top floor, the same place where I'd once stood before the family board, only to be mocked. The soft music in the elevator felt ironic. Years ago, I left here in despair. Today, each floor I passed was a reminder that I was nearing a fated confrontation. The doors opened. The Whitmore boardroom was unchanged, Long, wide, cold, with glass walls overlooking New York's skyline. The glossy walnut table stretched like a river of power. On it, neatly arranged documents, steaming coffee cups, and Mont Blanc pens I once didn't dare touch. Andrew stood at the head, speaking confidently about Whitmore's steady growth and vision for international expansion. His charts were dazzling, but I saw the gaps. Inflated numbers, growth curves drawn from fabricated data. Thanks to decisive strategy and strong partnerships, Whitmore's revenue maintains impressive growth, Andrew concluded, his voice smug. The room applauded. Catherine nodded approvingly, her eyes sweeping over Andrew with pride. The scene was eerily similar to 6 years ago. They were still confident in their own world, unaware that reality had shifted. I walked in, my heels clicked on the wooden floor, echoing as the room fell silent. A few board members looked up, frowning as they recognized me. Andrew froze, his face paling. "Izzy?" he stammered, disbelieving. "What are you doing here? This is a private family meeting." I gave a faint smile, sat down at the center of the table, and calmly placed my leather briefcase on the wood. "I know, and I'm not here as the niece you once rejected. I'm here as the CEO of Orion Global Holdings, the partner accounting for over 70% of Whitmore's logistics revenue, and I want to renegotiate our contract." The room fell into absolute silence. You could hear the ticking of the clock. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes sharp as knives. "You're saying Orion Global is yours?" "Exactly. For the past 6 years, I've run it, and today we need to have a serious talk." I opened my briefcase, pulled out a stack of documents, and placed them before each person. The large screen lit up with Orion's glowing logo. Some gasped. Others flipped through the papers, searching for proof I was lying. Andrew stood frozen, his face ashen. "No way," he muttered, eyes darting. "You're just the niece who wasn't Whitmore enough?" I cut in, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Or the dreamer unfit for Whitmore? Maybe so. But the irony is, that unfit dreamer is keeping this company alive." A board member exhaled sharply, gripping the documents. On the screen, charts showed clearly. Over half of Whitmore's revenue came from Orion's contracts. Without them, the group would face massive losses. Catherine gripped her chair, her voice low. "Why now? Why choose this moment to show up?" I looked her in the eye, emphasizing each word. "Because this is when you need to know the truth. And because from today, the game is no longer the same." Andrew tried to regain composure, forcing a smile. "This is revenge, isn't it? Because we didn't give you a seat 6 years ago?" I tilted my head, my gaze cold. If I wanted revenge, I'd have cut the contracts long ago. But I didn't. I'm here to do business, Andrew. The kind you once said I'd never understand. The tension was palpable. I saw wavering eyes around the table. Some whispered to each other. Others looked to Catherine, waiting for her to decide. She remained still, her face icy but her eyes betraying a storm of anger. In that moment, I felt the pain of years past, her dismissive look, Andrew's mocking laughter, dissolve, replaced by a powerful calm. I had returned, not to beg, but to declare. There was a truth I'd kept hidden for 6 years, and today, in the room where I was once made a laughingstock, I decided to unveil it. I knew that moment would change everything, not just my fate, but Whitmore Group's. I stood, pulling out my iPad and connecting it to the large screen on the wall. The first image appeared. Orion Global's logo, a gleaming silver blue, stark against the room's familiar backdrop of Andrew's stale reports. Whispers erupted as some flipped through the documents I'd handed out. I spoke, my voice steady and firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Isabella Chen, CEO of Orion Global Holdings. 6 years ago, I was rejected in this very room for not having enough Whitmore blood. 6 years later, I'm back, not to ask for a seat, but to show you the truth you've ignored." On the screen, numbers lit up. Orion's annual revenue, 3 times Whitmore's. A client list spanning 9 Fortune 500 companies and offices in 12 countries. I zoomed in on the growth chart, its curves soaring relentlessly. The room felt suffocated. An independent director muttered, Three times the revenue?" Andrew's face paled, his lips trembling. He forced a laugh. That's just exaggeration. There's no way a company you started could be that big." I turned, my gaze piercing, my tone laced with just enough sarcasm to cut deep. "Andrew, if you'd actually read real financial reports instead of your colorful PowerPoint, you'd know. Orion isn't just bigger than Whitmore. It's keeping Whitmore alive. I clicked. A dependency chart appeared. 70% of Whitmore's logistics revenue came from Orion. The board erupted. One member exclaimed, "My God, are we surviving solely because of her?" Catherine maintained an outward calm, but her hands gripped the chair until her knuckles whitened. She spoke, her voice low, each word hissing through her teeth. "How long have you hidden this?" I looked straight at her. 6 years. 6 years I built Orion from a small rented room in Brooklyn. 6 years you raised glasses to Andrew's success while this entire system lived off my company's contracts. Another wave of murmurs rose. A female board member whispered, "All this time we've been deceived." Andrew slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed. "No, this is a plot. You came back to destroy this family just because of a decision 6 years ago." I laughed, a cold, sharp laugh. If I wanted to destroy Andrew, I'd have cut the contracts in year 1, but I didn't. I gave you a chance. And today, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth and for business. I displayed the internal audit my team had prepared. Numbers glowed, hidden losses, covered up debts, the pretty reports Andrew had staged. Another board member gasped, "God, these figures match the rumors I heard from lower staff." Andrew stammered, Those are temporary errors, I'll explain." I stepped closer, lowering my voice but loud enough for all to hear. "You've had 6 years to explain, 6 years to prove you're worthy, but instead you chose to paint over fake numbers. And now it's over." My heart pounded, not from fear, but from release. 6 years of pent-up frustration finally burst, and I witnessed the truth laid bare in the place where I was once humiliated. Catherine closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, staring at me. "So what do you want, Izzy?" I paused, taking a deep breath. This was the moment the power dynamic shifted completely. "I want a contract renegotiation, and I want this board to understand Whitmore no longer holds the reins. If you want to survive, you must accept that this company lives because of Orion." A heavy silence enveloped the room. I saw the shift in their eyes, from doubt to worry, from worry to acceptance. No one could deny the numbers on the screen. I stood tall, my voice resolute. Truth can be hidden for a time, but it always finds a way to surface. And today, that truth is, I'm no longer the Izzy you rejected 6 years ago. I'm the one deciding whether Whitmore lives to see tomorrow. If you find this moment dramatic enough, comment "why" to let me know you want to hear more. If you think it's not compelling enough, comment N, because this story isn't over. There are nights when the city doesn't sleep, and there are nights when, even if it does, my mind stays painfully awake. Tonight is one of those. I sat in Orion's Manhattan office, the golden glow of the lamp casting light on the polished wooden desk, surrounded by stacks of thick documents. Every page, every number was a brick in the wall of truth I'd build before the Whitmore board tomorrow. A storm was coming, and this time, I held its map. Michael, my assistant, walked in with a new stack of files. He set them down, sighing. "All the fraud, from Andrew's hidden debts to Catherine's inflated profits, has been verified. If you want, tomorrow we can expose everything." I flipped through a few pages, eyeing the red-marked fake numbers. Part of me felt relieved. The truth would finally see light. But another part hesitated. I wondered, was this revenge? For 6 years, I'd built Orion with blood and tears just to prove they were wrong. And now, with power in my hands, was I doing the same thing they did to me? Excluding, humiliating, tearing down? Michael sat across from me, his calm eyes reading my thoughts. "You're thinking you're being too harsh, aren't you?" I nodded slightly. He smiled faintly. "But you're wrong. Harsh was when they pushed you out of the family door, laughed, and left you to swim alone. Justice is when you return, not with a dagger, but with the truth." His words echoed in my mind. Yes, this wasn't revenge. This was justice. Cold but necessary, like surgery to remove a tumor so the patient could survive. And Whitmore was that patient. I stood, walking to the glass window overlooking the city. Manhattan at night glowed with lights, cars streaming in endless trails. I wondered, where was Catherine now? Could Andrew sleep tonight? The answer came quickly. In another lavish apartment, Catherine sat upright, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. Beside her, Andrew paced restlessly like a caged animal. We have to do something, Mom, his voice broke. If Izzy releases that report tomorrow, we're done. Catherine closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She'd always believed she controlled everything: wealth, power, family. But for the first time, she felt her throne wobble. Is there a way to hide it? Andrew whispered, pleading. Or at least delay? Catherine opened her eyes, her gaze icy. Truth can't be hidden forever. We can only bargain. But Izzy, she's no longer the timid girl we knew. They fell silent. They knew the storm was at their door. Back at Orion's office, I closed the file. Michael poured me a black coffee, its bitter aroma a reminder. This was a battle requiring clarity. You know, he said slowly, I used to think you wanted them to beg. But after 6 years working with you, I get it. You just want them to face the truth, and that's the greatest punishment. I gave a faint laugh. Maybe, sometimes the truth is crueler than any revenge. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness spreading, blending with old memories. I remembered Catherine's dismissive look, Andrew's mocking laugh. I remembered feeling small, lost. But now I was different. I no longer needed their approval. What I needed was for the truth to speak. Have you ever had a night like that? A night where you know tomorrow will change everything, where your heart trembles with fear yet burns with resolve? If you have, you'll understand me now. Tomorrow I'd walk into that room, carrying not just numbers but a 6-year story of blood and tears. And when the door opened, I wanted to look Catherine in the eye. Let her see the niece she rejected had become a storm she couldn't withstand. There are mornings when you wake up knowing everything will change. For me, it was that morning, the day the truth, hidden for 6 years, would flood Whitmore's boardroom like a tsunami. I arrived early. The massive meeting room was still empty, New York's light streaming through glass walls, making the long wooden table gleam like a mirror. I set down my thick file, took a deep breath. Today, I wasn't just Izzy Chen, the rejected niece, but the CEO of Orion, delivering the bitterest pill in the company's history. The door opened. Board members filed in, their eyes cautious. Some tried to act casual, but I saw the tension in their steps. Catherine sat at the head, her face glacial, hands clasped tightly. Andrew followed, his forehead damp despite the strong air conditioning, clutching a thin stack of papers as if they could save his crumbling career. Shall we begin? Catherine said, her voice hoarser than usual. I nodded. The large screen lit up. The first slide appeared. Independent Audit Report, Orion Global Holdings. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice clear, today I'll show you why Whitmore Group can no longer hide the truth. I displayed the data. Red numbers glared. $9.2 million in hidden losses under miscellaneous operating costs. The room went silent for a few seconds, then murmurs erupted. One director, unable to hide his outrage, snapped, "What is this?" Andrew jumped up, hands shaking. "It's just an accounting error. We plan to adjust it next quarter." I tilted my head, a faint smile on my lips. An error? Interesting. Because our audit found these errors repeating across 4 quarters, and they all point to one thing: concealing losses. Whitmore's lawyer cleared his throat, trying to intervene. We must admit every company faces challenges. Your report could be biased. I cut him off, my voice ice cold. This isn't my report. This is an independent audit by a third party. All data comes from Whitmore's internal accounting system. If you think it's biased, explain why data pulled directly from your servers is biased. The lawyer fell silent, his face darkening. I continued. That's not all. We also found inflated revenue through dummy contracts. You can verify this in Appendix 3. All eyes turned to Andrew. He stammered, lips trembling. I just wanted to keep the company stable. If we reported losses, stock prices would tank, employees would panic. I did it for the family. I looked straight at him. Perhaps he saw the contempt in my eyes. Family isn't a shield for deceit. If you truly cared about the company, you'd have chosen transparency, not a prolonged lie. The board grew loud. One member slammed the table. How long have we been lied to? I clicked. The final slide appeared. Projection. Without Orion Global, Whitmore goes bankrupt in 18 months. No one spoke. Catherine stared at the screen, her hands gripping so tightly her fingers turned white. I knew she was thinking of the first time she pushed me out of this room. She thought she was protecting tradition, but that stubbornness had dragged the family into the mud. I gave a faint smile, my voice calm. You can be angry with me, but the truth stands. Whitmore isn't a fortress anymore. It's a sandcastle, and tomorrow it will collapse without Orion. If you've seen my previous video about my sister, you'll understand how much it hurts to be belittled and cornered by family. I've been through it, and now those who thought themselves invincible are tasting it. If you haven't watched, find it on my channel to understand why I stand here, so strong and so cold. Andrew slumped into his chair, his eyes empty. Catherine finally spoke, her voice choked. What do you want, Izzy? I looked around the table, letting my gaze linger on each face. Fear, shock, anger. Then I answered slowly but firmly. I don't want anything. I'm just bringing the truth. And now the choice is yours. Continue the lies and collapse, or face reality and rebuild. There was a moment in that boardroom I'll never forget, when the arrogant figure at the peak of power crumbled before everyone's eyes, and surprisingly, that moment didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd imagined. After I presented the audit, the room descended into chaos. Chairs scraped, papers rustled, voices rose in outrage. Some board members flushed red, others hung their heads, avoiding Andrew's gaze. Catherine sat like a cracked stone statue, her eyes darkening but refusing to admit defeat. Andrew was different. The man who always held his head high, preaching about tradition and Whitmore blood, now sat pale, lips trembling. I saw his hands clench until his knuckles whitened, then loosen, then tremble again. Finally, a choked sob escaped, so soft I thought I'd misheard. But no, it was Andrew, my cousin, crying in front of the entire board. I was wrong, he stammered, his voice breaking. Everything Izzy said, it's true. The room fell deathly silent. The man once hailed as the worthy heir now bowed his head, tears streaming down. Those tears weren't just fear of losing power. They were despair, with nothing left to cling to. I tried to hide it, he continued, voice shaking, because I was scared. Scared you'd see me fail, scared Mom would be disappointed, scared the family would know I wasn't as great as I pretended. I thought if I kept up the stable facade, everything would be fine. But now, I've only made it worse. I looked at my cousin. Was this the same arrogant Andrew who told me I didn't belong? Or was this a different person, raw, vulnerable, and pitiable? A conflicting wave rose in me. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, a strange sadness settled in. The power Andrew clung to for years was just a fragile mask, and when it fell, he was no different from a lost child. He turned to me, eyes red, his voice almost pleading. Izzy, please give me a chance. I don't want to end like this. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to start over. I fell silent. The board's eyes were on me. In that thick atmosphere, every breath felt heavy as stone. Part of me wanted to turn away, let Andrew drown in the mess he created. But another part, the part that knew the sting of being belittled, abandoned, whispered, should I give him a chance? I thought back to my years at Orion, the nights I fought failure alone. No one reached out to lift me up. I stood on my own, and now perhaps I was the only one who could extend a hand to Andrew, not to restore his throne, but to teach him to start from zero. I took a deep breath and spoke slowly. Andrew, you'll no longer hold any power at Whitmore. That's over. But if you truly want to start over, I can open a small door for you. He looked up, eyes brimming with fragile hope. There's a trucking branch in New Jersey that needs restructuring. It's not glamorous. No leather chairs, no boardroom spotlight. Just real work, numbers, and trucks. If you dare to start there, I'll recommend you. But the rest? You'll have to stand on your own. Andrew nodded, choking back tears, nearly collapsing into his chair with relief. The room stayed silent. I looked around. Some were shocked, some nodded, and Catherine stared at me with an unreadable mix of anger and bitterness. She probably never expected the niece she cast out to be the one offering her son a lifeline. Sometimes, power isn't in making someone kneel, but in choosing whether to help them stand. And that morning, in Whitmore's boardroom, I felt more clearly than ever that I held that choice. Andrew cried and begged for a chance to start over. I'd once imagined his downfall would bring me joy. But when that moment came, My emotions were more complex. Bitter, sorrowful, and oddly amused at how fate turns. I looked at him, the man who once refused to lower his gaze to my level. Now he sat there, shoulders trembling, face streaked with tears, no longer the worthy heir, but a defeated man craving forgiveness. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. Andrew, you'll give up everything. Every title, every ounce of power, every privilege at Whitmore Group. From today, you're no longer a leader here. The room gasped, the tension like a boulder crashing down. I saw Catherine stiffen, her eyes flashing with rage and helplessness. For her, stripping her son of power was like severing her own arm. Andrew bowed his head, silent for a few seconds, then nodded faintly. I understand. I continued, my voice softening, no longer a blade but an outstretched hand. But I won't let you sink completely. In New Jersey, there's a trucking branch needing restructuring. No glory, no red carpet, just real work. I can recommend you there. If you truly want to start over, begin there. Andrew looked up, his red eyes glinting with faint hope. You'd really give me that chance? I nodded. But remember, there's no Whitmore shadow to lean on this time. If you succeed, it's by your own effort. If you fail, no one else takes the blame. The room fell silent again. The board exchanged glances, some surprised, some nodding. They understood I wasn't just stripping away old power, but setting a fairer standard. Stand on your own. Andrew choked out. Thank you, Izzy. I won't let you down. I looked at him for a long time. Perhaps for the first time I saw in Andrew not arrogance, but a rare sliver of humility. Maybe failure had peeled away his pride, revealing a man who finally saw how small he was. Catherine was different. She turned to me, her eyes a mix of fury and contempt. You think you're generous? Giving my son a lowly job to flaunt your new power? I smiled, a tired, sardonic smile. No, Aunt Catherine, this isn't a lowly job. It's the chance you never gave him to grow through his own ability. My words silenced her. Deep down, she knew I was right. For years, she'd shielded Andrew with unearned prestige, leaving him unprepared to stand alone. That indulgence had made him crumble swiftly when faced with the truth. In that moment, I realized, some don't need further humbling. Failure itself is their harshest lesson. What they need is a chance to make amends. And true power lies not in pushing them deeper, but in deciding whether to offer them a chance to rise. I turned to the board. This is my choice. Andrew relinquishes all power at Whitmore but is allowed to start over in New Jersey. This decision isn't to save him, it's to save the company from further mistakes. No one objected. Some even looked relieved. Perhaps the idea of removing Andrew from the board had been brewing, waiting for a justified reason. Andrew took a long breath, then said firmly, I agree, I'll start from scratch. And in that moment, I felt a weight lift, not just from my shoulders, but from Andrew's too. You see, power sometimes isn't in applause or the highest seat, but in daring to give others a chance to make amends. I was once denied that chance, and I know how precious it is. So, I chose to give it to Andrew, not because he deserved it, but because I believe people only truly change when forced to start from zero. Some mornings carry the scent of an ending, but sometimes that ending is the start of a new order. The day Catherine was forced to step down was one such morning. The Whitmore boardroom that day held no laughter or hollow congratulations, only a heavy silence, like a funeral for old power. On the board members' faces, I saw exhaustion and resignation. They knew things could never return to how they were. Catherine sat upright at the head, still trying to maintain her queenly poise, but her eyes had lost their familiar icy gleam. Instead, there was emptiness, as if she'd just realized the empire she'd gripped for decades was slipping away. An independent director broke the silence. Mrs. Catherine, given the audit results and serious management failures, we propose you retire early. The word retire rang like a hammer strike. Catherine's lips twitched into a bitter smile. Retire? You want to remove me from the company I built? I sat quietly. This was her battle to face alone. Another director spoke. No one denies your contributions, but if Whitmore is to survive, we need a leadership change. I saw Catherine's shoulders tremble slightly. For someone who equated power with breath, that declaration was a death sentence. She scanned the table, seeking support. But this time, no one spoke for her. Even her loyal allies bowed their heads, avoiding her gaze. Finally, Catherine turned to me, her voice choked. "You must be thrilled, Izzy." I shook my head. "No, Aunt. This isn't my joy. This is just the truth. And sometimes the truth doesn't need anyone to revel in it. It carries its own weight." She fell silent, closing her eyes. When they opened, the defiance was gone. "Fine, I'll step down." Those words closed an era. Andrew, on the other hand, left Manhattan a few days later. I saw him off at the bus station, where a long-distance bus would take him to New Jersey. He wore an old shirt, carrying a small suitcase, no trace of his usual arrogance. "Izzy, I'll try," he said, his voice trembling. "I know I've done many things wrong, but I won't let this be another failure." I looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "This time, do it for yourself, not for Whitmore's shadow." Andrew gave a weak smile, his eyes red. I saw something truly shift in him. Perhaps, for the first time, he understood what it meant to stand on his own. The bus rolled away. I watched until it disappeared behind the buildings, wondering if my cousin had the resilience to redeem himself. But at least, I'd given him that chance. Back in the boardroom, the board reached a new decision. One member stood. "We've agreed. Isabella Chen, you will oversee Whitmore Group's restructuring with full authority to implement agreements with Orion Global." The sound of pens signing papers echoed, cold and final. I looked at the decision, my name printed formally. Part of me was still stunned. 6 years ago, I was cast out in shame. Now, this same place had chosen me to lead it into a new era. I looked up, my gaze sweeping the room. No longer the girl on the sidelines, I was now the one they relied on to survive. "I won't hide anything from you," I said. "This process will be painful. We'll have to cut out the rot, streamline operations, and above all, learn transparency. But if we don't, Whitmore will die." Some nodded, some winced, but no one objected. Leaving the boardroom, I stood by the glass window, looking down at the city. The afternoon sun bathed Manhattan in gold, illuminating every skyscraper, every stream of traffic. I thought, power isn't sitting in the highest chair. True power is turning an entire order upside down. And today I had done that. What I didn't expect was that as the dust settled in Whitmore's boardroom, another storm brewed from what I once called home. And strangely, it exhausted me more than the battle with the board. My phone buzzed incessantly, notifications flooding in like gunfire. I opened it, the family group chat. The first message made me chuckle, a bitter, helpless laugh. "You betrayed our blood." Followed by a barrage of accusations. "Doing this to your aunt is no different from stabbing her in the back." "Family comes first, Izzy, how could you? Have you forgotten who raised you?" I read each line, feeling both sad and oddly detached. How strange that the people who never checked on me when I was cast out, who never offered a hand during the years I built Orion, now emerged as moral judges. I set the phone down, sighing, then I typed a single reply. "Family can't be a shield for wrongdoing. If family becomes an excuse to hide fraud, it's no longer kinship, it's complicity." I hit send and went silent. You might wonder why I wasn't angry, why I didn't explode. Truthfully, I once hoped they'd understand me. But after 6 years, I stopped expecting. When you're betrayed once, it's a wound. When it happens repeatedly, it becomes immunity. The phone kept buzzing, but I didn't want to read more. I turned to a new stack of documents preparing for the restructuring phase. My eyes fell on a corner of the desk where I'd placed a printed copy of an old email. It was the rejection email from 6 years ago sent by Catherine. I'd printed it and placed it neatly on my CEO desk, not to boast, but to remind myself I was once deemed not enough, and that rejection became the fuel that brought me here. I picked up the paper, rereading the familiar words. "Izzy, you lack leadership qualities. Perhaps a smaller role would suit you better." I chuckled softly. Indeed, a smaller role. Yet I'd built a corporation 3 times the size of Whitmore and returned to sit in the chair they denied me. I placed the email back on the desk, letting it sit proudly as a symbol of victory, not over Catherine or Andrew, but over doubt, disdain, and my own past fears. The phone buzzed again, this time a call from my father. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. His voice was hoarse, full of reproach. "You've shamed the whole family, Izzy." I closed my eyes, responding calmly. "If the truth shames the family, maybe the problem isn't the truth, it's the family." Silence hung on the line for a few seconds, then he sighed. You don't understand. Family is everything. I smiled bitterly. No, Dad. Truth and ability are everything. Family only matters when it doesn't become an excuse to cover up wrongs. I hung up. My heart held no anger, only a cold clarity. I returned to work, but a quiet sadness lingered. I realized that sometimes enemies are easier to face than family. Enemies don't wear familiar faces or know the memories that make you vulnerable. Family is different. They know exactly which wounds hurt the most. But I also understood. If I crumbled under their accusations, I'd return to the place Catherine once buried me, and I couldn't let that happen. That afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the glass, I sat at the desk, gazing at the bustling city. On the table, the rejection email remained, a silent witness. I whispered to myself, let truth and ability be the measure, not blood, not privilege, not empty words about kinship. Some sunsets make you sit in silence for hours, not for their beauty, but because they mark the end of an era. That evening, I sat in my new office on Whitmore's top floor, watching New York glow orange, and realized I had come full circle. Michael walked in, holding an open bottle of champagne, a bright smile on his face. He raised a glass to me. Congratulations, Izzy, you did what no one thought you could. I smiled, but it wasn't the grin of a triumphant victor. It was the smile of someone who'd fought a long battle, knowing true victory wasn't in numbers or chairs, but in something deeper. I glanced at the framed paper on my desk, the printed rejection email from 6 years ago. That old wound had become a symbol, a reminder that from humiliation, strength could bloom. You know, I said, eyes fixed on the paper, there were times I thought my only goal was to see them fall. But when Catherine had to leave, when Andrew cried and begged for a chance, I realized, no, I didn't need revenge. I needed justice. Michael sipped his champagne, nodding. And you chose a different kind of justice, not with a dagger, but with compassion. I gave a faint smile. Compassion doesn't mean excusing wrongs. Compassion is giving others a chance to fix themselves. Looking back, I saw every milestone clearly. 6 years ago, I left Whitmore's boardroom in shame, rejected by my own family. Then I built Orion from a cramped Brooklyn room, enduring sleepless nights and failures that nearly broke me. Later, I returned as CEO, shocking them when they realized my company was their lifeline. I exposed the truth, forced Andrew to bow, Catherine to step down. But I also extended a hand, giving Andrew a chance to start over, to learn to grow from zero. To outsiders, this might seem a sweet revenge story, but I know it was never about revenge. It was about finding justice, and justice must be compassionate to endure. Outside, New York's lights flickered on. The glass skyscrapers glowed like thousands of tiny flames in the night. I suddenly felt small before that scene, yet stronger than ever, because I knew, from now on, I'd never again sit on the sidelines, waiting for someone to grant me a seat. I was the one who set the table. Michael spoke softly, breaking my thoughts. Any regrets? I paused, then shook my head. No. Every wound taught me a lesson. Without that rejection, there'd be no Orion. Without Orion, there'd be no today. I turned to him, smiling lightly. And if I have any regret, it's only for once thinking my worth needed others' validation. I stood, walking to the glass window, gazing at the streams of cars like the city's pulsing veins. In my mind, faces flashed. Catherine, proud but alone. Andrew, broken then stumbling to find himself. The board, once complicit in silence, now forced to face the truth. And me, the girl once cast out, now sitting at the center of power. I whispered, as if to myself, but also to everyone who'd followed this journey. This isn't revenge. This is justice, and only compassionate justice endures. Looking back on this entire journey, I see that each chapter wasn't just a personal event, but a profound lesson in perseverance, justice, and compassion. 6 years ago, I thought I'd been knocked out of the game, that the only door to my future had slammed shut forever. But it was in that painful moment that I found the strength to forge my own path. What I want you to take away from this story isn't glee at others' failures, but the belief that every rejection can become fuel, every wound can transform into strength. Family may turn their backs, friends may doubt, society may belittle you, but as long as you persevere and believe in your true worth, you can rewrite your fate. I also learned something vital. True power isn't in tearing others down, but in choosing to lift them up. When Andrew begged for a chance, I could have crushed him, But I opened a small door because I believe forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the highest form of strength. Justice based solely on punishment is fleeting, but paired with compassion, it endures. This story, at its core, isn't about revenge, but about proving that truth and ability are the only true measures. Blood, status, or privilege may offer temporary advantages, but only transparency, effort, and compassion create lasting value. And to you, the one following this story, if you've been rejected, belittled, or pushed to the sidelines, don't see it as the end. See it as a new beginning. Let perseverance be your ally, let truth guide you, and let compassion keep your heart from turning to stone. Don't forget to follow my channel to join me in the journeys ahead, because I believe every story carries a seed, and when we share, we plant those seeds in each other's hearts. Thank you for walking with me to the end of this road. And remember, the greatest victory isn't defeating others, but keeping a compassionate heart amid life's storms.